Okay, apologies to all you more wargaming type people, and well, not many people watch my 18xx vids, so they can't be too popular. It used to be different when I put them up on Board Game Geek, but I don't really have a way to advertise them. So this is 18EU, and my story with this is I bought it used, supposedly very good condition. Not so sure that qualifies. Most of it's in pretty decent condition, but there were some choices that maybe I wasn't entirely aware of. What it looks to me is like the owner of the game, it's a kit copy. There's no question of that. It's kind of cut in iffy shape and everything, but that would all be fine. But I think the owner of the game mounted on metal. And the reason for that is the tokens are all magnetic, and then unable to send a metal board through, he had to, and unable to fit it in a box. He didn't have a box for it. What he ended up doing was, I think, sticking the map sheet pieces onto some decent cardstock or whatever, but it's bulging and it looks like something needs to be done about it. It just doesn't, it doesn't look like it's in great condition. It came without money. I knew it wasn't going to have cash money. Many players use poker chips. And let's see, it also came with an 18 Nebraska box, which I also knew about. It was like, well, I don't have the box for this, but I give you a box. Like, okay, that's cool, but I ended up paying a little bit too much for what I think I have here, except that, well, I wanted something of this nature that handled, so the focus of this one, as opposed to some of the others I've looked at, is to handle some of the international borders and the growth of small railways into larger ones. Now, we have other games in the XX series that handle growth of small railways into larger ones. Most of them, though, involve a different type of mechanism. The only game that I'm aware of that handles it in the same way, and I'm sure there are others that do, as this, well, in a particularly similar way to this, is actually 2038. And it's a very neat little mechanism where, in order to start a major company, you have to sacrifice one of your miners. Now, 2038 has multiple paths to being able to start a major corporation. This has one until the 5 trains come out. And by the way, if you're not an XX aficionado, go look at some of my other videos. 1830 is a good choice, 18AL. I'm assuming a basic understanding of 18XX. For this, just as I assume a basic understanding of wargaming principles with most of the war games that I forward. I think I did Napoleon's Art of War as my kind of intro for it. Okay. So this cover, by the way, I have 18OE, which is part of why this got, I just picked that up, why this got kind of triggered. I mean, in an 18XX, I don't know, addiction right now or whatever, 1844, 1854 got me very excited about it again. So I'm starting to do more games of the type, picking up 18OE. I wanted to do this. I wanted to do 18OE, but I don't have it stickered yet, and that'll happen. Okay, so let's look at what's special about this in comparison to others. First of all, starting capital is pretty low for players. The bank is $12,000, so I'm using the 1844 bank for this, because again, this didn't come with cash money. But each player only starts with $250, which doesn't sound like a lot if you're an 1830 player, and it's not a lot for this game either, you'll see. We have phases which work very much like the 1830 phases, the exception, the addition of gray tiles with the purchase of the first 8 train. You have 8s instead of diesels. Another exception is there's a whole shitload of 2 trains, one for each minor company. You get one with your minor company. When you buy a minor company, you get a train on it. That's great. There are some additional trains that are optional. 2 3s and a 4. Which they say, well, use them or don't. Your call. And I prefer I think I prefer a shorter, more brutal game, especially since this is the first time I'm looking at this game. So I'll be making a lot of mistakes and everything, I'm sure. But I think I'd rather not invest too much time into it, and I have the feeling that if you start putting some trains in the middle, the game might kind of slow down. For major corporations, you have 8, which seems to be a standard number. The game holds up to 6 players, so we'll see how that goes. We got a stock market. The starting pars are over here. They don't matter too much in this game, and I'll explain why. Because it's a partial capitalization game, and the corporations sell their stock at face value as opposed to par value. We've got a certificate limit, and for each number of players, they have one of these. It's 11 in this, initial capital on there, just to help remind you. A little priority deal elephant. Which is weird. It's like the elephant has become the priority deal symbol ever since 1853 came out for so many games in such a weird sort of way. I kind of like the cow over there. Okay. Your certificate limit, your minor companies count against your certificate limit. There's no privates, nothing like that. A couple of other weird little things you have. You have these little reminder markers for mountains. Basically, when you build mountain hexes, when you then upgrade the track, it still costs money, a lesser amount, only $60 to upgrade the track. I've got these extra 120 markers which you can put on the board initially to help remind you, hey, I have to pay 120, but that's pretty clear there, and I think it'll just confuse me if I'm using them, so I'm tossing them over. Ideally, those would have been double-sided on the counter track. You also have a little payout chart, which I saw in, I think it's 46. Really cool idea. And we actually looked at it in something, maybe 60 had it as well. One of the games I did recently had it, or not all that recently, but within the past couple of years, had it on it, and I found that a really helpful little way. I won't have to spreadsheet in order to see what happened recently. If I want to look back at the long-term situation in the game, a spreadsheet's still useful, but I probably will forego that on this one for a number of reasons. Okay. What do you got? Stock price movement. It's pretty much your standard 1830 style. If you sell stocks, they go down by 1 for each stock you have. No special zones, though. No oranges or anything like that you can hide in. If you're sold out, you move up. If you withhold earnings, you go back. And if you pay out, and you... Now this is where it gets kind of clever. And you pay at least as much as your stock value for the company, you go forward. Which means if you're starting at a par of $100, you've got to get a run that pays 10 a share, or else your stock stands still. Now you're going to have half swallows in this game, and those don't affect your stock market value. What those do, those don't let you sit even no matter what on stock market. It's still based on, are you paying out a reasonable proportion of the value of the stock? So if you pay over the value that the stock's at, you end up going forward still. If you don't pay more, but you pay at least $1 in dividends, you stand still and avoid the swallow penalty. That's pretty cool, actually. There's no jumping or anything like that, though. Stock round, pretty standard. Forces you've got to do all your sales before you do your purchase in a round or in a turn. Okay. When you purchase a corporation for the first time, you have to buy the president's certificate, you set the par, you put that money into the company treasury. It's more complicated. In addition, if the 5 train hasn't come out yet, you must exchange a minor company for an additional 1/3 share of that corporation. Now this doesn't, I don't believe, float the corporation. You're still going to have to get to the 50% to have the corporation operate. So you may end up with a corporation on the board that's kind of frozen and weird. Starting the corporation is kind of blurred in a few places. So when you declare the minor in, all its money and trains go into the corporation's new treasury. The minor token is replaced, and the corporation is now going to have to pay $100 for its 4 extra tokens that it can place. It doesn't buy them during the game, it buys them at the beginning. That reminds me a little of 53. I think you bought your tokens up front there. The corollary to all of this is, before phase 5, if you don't have a minor company, you're not going to be able to start a major corporation. Now, there are a lot of minor companies. There aren't that many major corporations. They don't all turn into majors. Some of them merge into the majors in a different way. There's no merging between the majors, though. I really like merging between majors. Okay. So let's see where we are. Okay. Everybody passes. Priority is set as normal. The last person, or the first person who passed in a series of full passes gets it. Share prices get adjusted if it's sold out, whatever. And then, all right, for the minors, let's go back to them. When they run, they always split their money 50-50 between the player and the treasury. It's sort of become a definition for minors in the game series. Okay, how do you sell these minors at the start of the game? So there's, as normally, a special stock round, which then leads immediately to the first operating round. There'll always be 2 operating rounds, and then you go to the regular stock rounds. That means no corporations are going to start in the first operating round. And it also means something and the rules kind of enforce that, because you can't trade a minor in until after it's operated. There's also something interesting there, which is what? The 2 operating rounds, but... Oh, yeah. All the minors have to sell for the game to start. Now, how do the minors sell? It uses an auction similar to what we saw in 1844 just recently, which is the player with priority chooses one of the companies and says, this one's up for auction. Now, it's a little vague about some of the specifics here, but I think that's how it's meant to go. And then, once that company is sold, whoever makes the highest bid, and the bids are strictly limited to $5 increments. So you can't kind of trick somebody with, yeah, I'm bidding 107 on that, which might really skew someone else's plans. Everything has to be $5 increments for whatever reason. Okay, you have to start the bid on the corporation, on the minor company, with at least $100. If you don't do so, it is not a pass. If an auction is started, all players, including any who declined to start the auction, may in turn increase the bid by a multiple of £5. Once you pass, though, you cannot rejoin the auction for that minor company. So I could bring up and say, I'm going to auction the 1. Or I could decide I'm auctioning the 3. Or whatever. And I could start it at $100, 105, whatever. Or I could just say, I'm not bidding yet. Now, if nobody bids on that company, it is re-offered at what, $5 less? Yeah, I believe so. No, $10 less. So then it'll be re-offered at $90. Nobody wants it, it's re-offered at $80. This is a big deal because there are 15 of these companies. And you only start with 250 pounds each. You do some thinking, 15 divided by 6 is more than 2. You don't have enough money to buy 2 $100 railways. So, the railways, it's almost like a reverse auction, except if somebody puts up a particularly good one, people will bid on it. What is particularly good? Well, that's hard to tell, but I would guess Paris, Berlin, Vienna, these cities with bonus money on them are going to be better. We're going to have some trouble coming to a good decision making on this, but this northern Paris run can hook up two $40 cities right away. That's pretty nice. The Berlin run is a 30 and a 10, not so good. Probably, well, Ys are 20s to begin with, but they get, no, they're 30s. Yeah, Ys are 30s to begin with, which means if I hook up to the 4s Dresden, I actually have a pretty good run here. Now, most of the starting cities actually, maybe all of them, actually have a Y on them. Yeah, it looks like all of them. So the private companies are all going to start at a 30. Leading into a doinker is not a bad thing, though, necessarily. I'll explain why in a moment. Okay, I can explain why now. They're free. They don't count against your train run, but they do generate revenue. So you're not skipping them or anything. Okay. So now, when the 5 comes out, you have something special that happens with the miners, which is they run until the end of that series of operating rounds, just as they're going into the stock round, and then everybody must make an exchange. Now, those exchanges aren't for new corporations at that point. Those are exchanges to merge into companies, into the existing corporations. And you can do that at other points in the game. Instead of buying shares of stock, you can merge one of your miners into the corporation. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Okay, forming the corporations. Now, it seems to me that the corporations don't have any real existence on the board. Their only existence is insofar as they're started by a miner, which means you could start like the Prussian over in Paris if you want. It's kind of silly just in terms of like, you know, what's going on and what it means, but you know, it's your option to do that if you really want to be a dick. All right. Now, once phase 5 starts and the 5 trains are out, when you buy a corporation, you're going to fully capitalize it. And it's, I believe its shares go into the bank pool. You can place its token in any open city. You don't merge for a minor company. You have to buy the shares one at a time. Oh no, the money goes into the corporate treasury. But once 5 shares have been bought, the corporation gets its entire starting value from the bank pool. Yeah, it's what I said. They're fully capitalized. You have to get to the 50% to start it. Now, you have to get to the 50% to start a corporation anyway, if I recall correctly. Maybe I'm mistaken. Let me look for that, because I'm not sure I'm telling you the truth. I wasn't lying to you. You have to get to 50% to start a corporation. So the miners might well be running for a little while before any corporations start, just because people are going to need to come up with enough cash on hand to float corporations and turn the miners into them. Now you're going to have some interesting stances in terms of, hey, you know, is it better to have a big corporation, a real corporation running, or is it better to have these miners, and you know, what price are they all worth and everything? And that's why this is going to be a complete exploration, like I did with 1844. I'm standing here saying, wow, you know, there's no easy, the bidding portfolios that work in most of the games just aren't going to work here. So again, I'm going to have to kind of make guesswork, and maybe things will go for too much, too little, whatever. It's also hard to judge. Okay, well, you know, this nice run here that's worth 80, how much better is that than like being stuck out here in Munich that's worth a lot less for a run with a 2 train? Okay. Okay, now if phase 5 happens, like if you're ending up with an unfloated company and you enter that phase 5 situation and you get to the stock round there, now your corporation changes. It changes as though it was floated in phase 5, which means it'll be fully capitalized once it hits its 50%. Even though it still might have trains and money from privates, etc., you don't get penalized quite as badly for having a corporation that's just sitting out there not doing anything. But it won't get any operating rounds, and that kind of sucks. Change of presidency handled pretty normally here. But the thing is, no matter what, when you start a major corporation, whatever amount of money you have, you spend $100 of that to get your 4 additional dots, however you start the corporation. Laying track, for the most part, your minor companies are only allowed to lay 1 yellow per turn. On the first operating round, though, they're each allowed to lay 2, which is important because, well, they need the jump to get places, to tell you the truth. Miners can never do upgrades, though, and they have to pay money to go through certain terrain, and they start with no money. You can place a single token on each of your corporation's operating phases after you lay your track. It doesn't cost you anything. You've already paid the money up front. What this means is you're probably going to see all 4 additional tokens plus whatever tokens are used are gained through merging in the corporation. I don't know. See, those may use some of these 4. They give 4 additional. I think merging tokens, you actually, if you want them, you actually end up taking them out of your real tokens. You have 1 for the price chart, 1 for here, and 1 for the miner that that merges you. So yeah, you have 4 additional tokens, and that's it. So if anybody else merges and you take their stations, you'll end up using up some of those tokens that you paid for. All right, we haven't really explained merging fully, but let me keep going with operations and we'll go back to merging because it's kind of weird. Okay. So your routes for the trains, let's see. I'm a little concerned whether or not you have to include 2 cities. A legal route is a continuous branch of track, including on it a city containing the corporation or minor company station token, And you must have one or more other cities, towns, ports, or off-map locations. Okay, so you can hit anything. So yeah, you could run from Berlin to Stettin as you could in most games. The reason it's not that I had a question about that is because a 2-train can run from Berlin through Stettin and Thorn, collecting the income from them, all the way to Warsaw with a 2-train. Okay. Standard rules for most of the tracks, except for one thing. 4-way junctions like this. Hey, look, it doesn't have a bridge. It's an actual junction, but without a town. There's ones with towns, but there's ones also without towns. Here, you can actually run on both of them as if it were one of these suckers, or as if it had a bridge on it. But you could also make that sharp turn or whatever. You have much, much more flexible track positioning here. Everything allows you. You don't have the curve of the track affecting whether or not you can make a switch in direction, and that's kind of an interesting little piece to it. I've already talked about dividends, full, half, or withhold. If you withhold, you automatically go back. If you pay full or half, as long as you break your company's stock value, you go forward a space. If you don't, you stand still. You're allowed to buy trains, of course. You can only buy the newest, well, you can only buy the train from the offering or a train that's sitting in the pool that maybe gets discarded because of a phase change. Or once the 3 trains are available, or once the first 3 trains bought, you can buy a Pullman car for $100. That counts as a train. It's going to enhance one of your cities for your routes. Basically, it doubles the value of a city. That's pretty good early on. Now, if we look at the tile upgrade, we see the 6 tiles. Only the gray tiles only come from Ys, it looks like. No. I'm sorry. They only come from brown cities, normal brown cities. And that might be important because the brown special cities are better or as good as grays, and the brown Ys are pretty good. They're better than the others, but they kind of decrease in value as you go. Which means you got to be on a non-Y space. You can only play Y tiles on Y spaces. Where are we here? Okay, train purchases. The train limits look like they're the same as 1830. The effects look like they're the same. You've got, you know, rusting of 3s on the 6, etc. The off-map get upgraded on the 5s, stuff like that. You do have a different kind of terrain here, which is the port. It counts as a doinker town, i.e. you can run to it without counting it against your run length, but it's an endpoint. These count as cities. You have to count them in your run. Okay, now we jump over to stock, which is that it's partial capitalization, essentially. I talked about the Pullman car. If you don't have a train and you're a major corporation, you must, other than a Pullman, you must buy a train. Whenever you have to discard trains, a Pullman is the first thing that gets discarded and it's available again. After that, you discard what you wish. And a Pullman doesn't count as a train for your train requirements, so you have to buy something. You lose your Pullman if you lose your other trains, and then you have to buy a new train and maybe a new Pullman as well. There seems to be a limited number of Pullmans, but you can only have one per corporation. I think there's only 5 of them, so one corporation will not have one. If you have to raise money, Okay, if you have a corporation and you don't have, and minor companies don't count for this. Minor companies can operate without a train, and they just don't make money then. And maybe it's time to start merging. Major corporations must have a train. I think it's no matter what, if it has operated. And you must buy the cheapest train available if you don't have enough cash on the corporation to buy a train otherwise. You can buy trains between corporations. There's no limit on that, except the train limit, the number of trains per corporation, etc. You're allowed to sell stock in order to reach the cost of the train. You cannot sell stock in any corporation that's not operated, ever. So you might go bankrupt due to that. You can't sell stock in the current corporation on a forced purchase if it would change the presidency. You can't dump it on someone in the midst of a forced purchase, which is perfectly reasonable. Otherwise, you can sell whatever you like. There's no limits, I think, in the bank pool as to how much shares can sit there. There is a limit on player holdings. This rule book is not very good. I think players are only allowed to hold 60%. That's what I recall. Okay. In the event that you can't pay for the train, you sell all your stocks, now you're liquidated. Anything that you couldn't sell and all your cash on hand goes back to the bank. Now this is important because it means that you can't win by bankruptcy, however likely that is, but you also, it also doesn't end the game. In fact, the end game conditions are the bank breaks or all but one player goes bankrupt, which is the harshest, or perhaps the, I don't know, maybe the fairest of all the different bankruptcy laws I've seen. I've seen ones where the second player bankrupt ends the game. Now, 1844 has no player bankruptcy, which is also kind of cool, except you get stuck playing the game. I don't know which is worse, having to leave the game early after going bankrupt or being stuck playing a game that you have no stocks in, basically. And no chance of getting anything other than last place, unless somebody else does worse, and bankrupt's harder. Okay, let me think where I am. If you go bankrupt, all your shares go back in the bank pool. This can cause a couple of odd things to happen. First of all, if nobody owns enough shares of the corporation to take over the presidency of a corporation that you just dumped into the bank pool, that corporation closes, comes off the map, and is available to be restarted. And all its tokens and everything disappear. But you could end up dumping the company on someone through a bankruptcy. The company that currently is undergoing a stock train purchase. Whatever money you were able to raise is available to the new owner, who has to raise money at that point. And a neat little mechanism. But of course, you can always just pay $1 to another corporation or minor company and take its train. Minor companies don't need to run a train. I talked about that. Tile upgrades, pretty much standard rules on these. Vienna has an upgrade cost somewhere. Wow, that's interesting. This isn't on here. Where did that go? The yellow tile, oh, south of Vienna. Yeah, this tile is a mountain hex, sort of, but it's already partially built, so it only costs you $60 to upgrade when you want to upgrade. All right, we have not talked about mergers complete. We talked about forming a corporation from a minor, but you can also merge a minor into a corporation. And you can do this at a couple of points. The first is when the corporation is forming, you have the option to, instead of buying a share of that corporation from the Treasury, to exchange your minor company for a share of that corporation. And then you get a share out of the bank, out of the corporation treasury. The corporation gets your assets, including your dot if they want it. But you can only do this if you connect to the corporation. And we have to find the rules on connection. But it's essentially that you can run an infinite length train not blocked by dots to where the corporation is, or you're in the same starting city. And I think that can be, I think that's starting hex. So for example, a corporation that starts in Paris, you could start this corporation in Paris. Running trains, I forgot to mention this. So some of these cities have two circles in them. You are allowed actually in this game to have both those circles, to have a dot in both those circles. At the time, through mergers. But if you do so, and the city conglomerates into a single thing, like that, you can't have two dots in that anymore. One of your dots goes away. Anyway, when you merge at this point, when a corporation's starting, you trade your minor company in, you get a share of that corporation, it gets what it wants of it. There's one other time when minors can merge into the corporation, which is the final exchange round. When phase 5 begins and you get to the first stock round, just before the first stock round when phase 5 happens, each player, starting with the president that started phase 5 by buying the first 5 train, and we'll have to mark that somehow. This doesn't affect priority deal. And by the way, neither does the bidding on the miners affect priority deal. Then you're allowed to, for each player in turn must choose one of their miners and dispose of it, and you go around each doing it. You know, you get one shot and then the next person gets one shot. So if you have multiple miners, you may have to wait a while before you do your second one. They get to merge into a corporation that they can connect to. If there's no corporation that can connect to, their miner just disappears. If there's no shares of the corporation that they connect to, the miner disappears. If there are shares in the treasury, you merge with the corporation, your money goes into the treasury, the dot can be handed over. I think the dot can be handed over no matter what. If you merge with a share that's in the bank pool, i.e. there's nothing in the treasury, well, then all your assets go to the bank. And the corporation you just merged with doesn't really get the same kind of advantages from it. So that's going to be kind of a tricky thing to look at. Anyway, I think that's the main points of this. Like I said, I've been having some real trouble with these rules. And there are some interesting concepts here that aren't absolutely clear. As I come up to them during play, you know, we'll stop and maybe have to look up a rules. Maybe I explained something wrong. Maybe my understanding is incorrect. But I want to get playing and I want to start exploring it rather than, you know, get the rules down perfectly. I think you have an idea. If you don't watch the whole playthrough, well, you know, maybe I'm telling you something wrong, that's all. Since my rules have not completely uploaded, I remembered there was something I left out. When you make a run, if you run from one red location to another, and it only counts Hamburg if it's your one of your endpoints, which might not be a great idea. You can get a bonus for a red-to-red run. This is similar to what 1844 has, but instead of being a geographical east-west, any red-to-red run works. The number of your tokens that you run through in the phase of the game combine to give you that bonus. So for example, in the green phase, hey, you can only get 10 extra bucks. But as you go further, you can start to make a nice little additional cash outlay there. the runs aren't going to be like we saw in 1844. You know, first of all, these cities are fairly limited. The biggest is a 70 here. The Paris to London route looks pretty good. I think we're going to see somebody bid, you know, over $100 on the Paris train, the northern one especially, but probably both of them. But it's hard to come up with those bids, by the way. It's going to be almost impossible without really knowing what the track is likely to develop as, which is why, again, this is an exploration rather than anything else. But anyhow, it does give a little bit of a bonus to building the track properly and getting yourself hooked up where you want to go. And it might mean, hey, if Hamburg doesn't go anywhere too exciting, it might be worth making it your end point.